Welcome to the Crypto and Blockchain Talk.
Hello.
Hey.
Guten Tag.
Aloha.
Hola. Shalom.
Hello.
Namaste.
Ni hao.
Privet.
Hello.
Salut. Yassas.
Salve.
Ciao.
Bonjour. Our podcast talks about the latest trends in the worlds of cryptocurrencies and the blockchain. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Crypto and Blockchain Talk. And this week, I have with me Rafael Belchior, and he is a PhD student who is studying everything that is glorious about computer science and blockchain engineering, and he is at the Technical University in Lisbon, which is Técnico Lisboa. Is that correct, Rafael?
Yes, that is correct, Aviva. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no, I actually didn't do the welcome yet, but welcome to our show, Rafael.
Thanks for having me again.
Oh, this is really good. No, I'm really excited. So, Rafael, you wrote a paper which is being read by many, many people. And even when you Google it, you'll see it's coming up now on some pretty prestigious links that have to do with everything to do with blockchain and crypto. And so the name of your paper is A Survey on Blockchain Interoperability. Now, we all know that interoperability means that things can work together. So it basically means that blockchains can work together. So the paper talks about how blockchain interoperability is emerging as a crucial factor. And you have classified it into three categories, which is to do with cryptocurrency interoperability, blockchain engines in themselves, and blockchain connectors. So far, have I said this all correct?
Yes, that is correct, Aviva. And I can tell you that one of the reasons that I think that this area is emerging quite fast and it's increasingly relevant, it's because blockchain interoperability is needed now more than ever. Initially, blockchains were created for a specific purpose. So the first blockchain, Bitcoin, was created for enabling decentralized cryptocurrency that didn't rely on governments. Then Ethereum came as a more general purpose blockchain, but with visible limitations on the performance, for example, the throughput. And these gave birth to an enormous number of different blockchains, each one with their own capabilities and limitations. But the problem is that each blockchain is a data silo. It's very difficult for blockchains to talk with each other. And the big number of blockchain solutions creates a big problem to developers and to entrepreneurs, which is which blockchain should I choose, right? Should I choose the blockchain with better performance? Should I choose the blockchain that is best decentralized? Am I choosing privacy over convenience, for example? And there are so many options that it's really difficult to choose the best infrastructure for developing your app, your business. So naturally, blockchain interoperability solutions arise as a solution to mitigate this risk and to enable synergies between different types of blockchains and different businesses. We realized that this was becoming increasingly relevant, and we aim to answer three research questions. The first one is, are the conditions necessary for blockchain interoperability already fulfilled? The second, what are the current available blockchain interoperability solutions? And this gives birth to our categorization. And finally, what are some of the use cases that we can have with several blockchains? It is actually difficult, right? We still don't know quite well, or we don't still how to use multiple blockchains at the same time. But nonetheless, there are some interesting use cases that can benefit from multiple blockchains.
You've put this into three different categories. So you obviously have case studies or use cases for each one of these three categories. And I want to look at each one of these three in their own right. So the first one that you have is about cryptocurrency directed interoperability approaches. So are you talking about the blockchains that obviously cryptocurrencies are based off of interoperating?
Yes. First category, crypto-directed solutions are the solutions that have as a main goal to allow asset transfers between chains. Asset as in cryptocurrencies. And these solutions were the first ones appearing. This makes sense because the first use case of blockchains were cryptocurrencies, so it makes sense that the first interoperability solutions were directed to cryptocurrencies as well. So we have a large pool of solutions for cryptocurrency transfer across blockchains, them the side chains. and then we have a hybrid solutions that combine some of these ideas. And perhaps the most notorious are the sidechains, right? The sidechains are very special because they allow not only for transferring assets among blockchains, but also to offload transactions and to provide functionalities, new features for the end users of such blockchain. So essentially, a sidechain is an extension of a chain, right? Although we can consider, for example, Ethereum to be a sidechain of Bitcoin and Bitcoin to be a sidechain of Ethereum, and it allows transaction offload. We have a cross-chain communication protocol that mediates the transactions between the main chain and the secondary chain or the sidechain.
I'm just going to ask you a quick question. Now, you keep saying we. So when you're saying we, are you talking about you and your colleagues at the Técnico Lisboa? Or are you talking about your team where I know that you're actually looking at blockchain interoperability which is the Hyperledger Cactus project?
Right.
So when you're saying we, who's the we?
Fair question. I use we mainly for we as the authors of the paper, although I owe a huge thanks to all the people that contributed to reviewing the paper, including people from Hyperledger Cactus. All right. So one of the things that we did in this paper was trying to double check as much solutions as we could with someone responsible for those. Right. So for example, to validate our view on Polkadot, we contacted Gavin Wood, the founder of Polkadot, and these allow us to navigate with more security in these not so consolidated territory. Mm-hmm. Because normally when you're doing research, if you have academic papers, they have been reviewed, you know that they're up to date, but lots of these solutions are experimental, they're not peer reviewed, they rely on grey literature, which is a fancy word for white papers, reports, blog posts, and so on. And it's very easy to them to get outdated because people are focusing on building solutions and not so much on documenting the whole process, and especially in a very rigorous way. There are obviously exceptions, but it's generally difficult to navigate.
Obviously, blockchains are supposed to be designed to be self-sufficient, decentralized ledgers. And many of them, if not most of them, are peer verifying. Yeah, and this is supposed to be one of the key aspects of a blockchain in order to keep it robust and the transaction secure and everything else that you can think of that what makes a blockchain. So if you're going to have and I'm just throwing this out there before we do the deeper dive into that triumvirate of categories we talked about, if you're going to allow the transmission of information from one blockchain to another blockchain, does that not somehow degrade that whole ideal of what a blockchain is, and that blockchain interoperability is in some ways anti-blockchain and would possibly create maybe some points or holes, somehow open up a portal for people to do things that they perhaps shouldn't be doing, if you understand where I'm coming from. So would it not be that if you were to build a bridge in between two blockchain protocols to make them interoperable, that you would actually possibly have the ability to somehow mess with things that you're not supposed to?
I think that's a very, very, very fair question, and there is not enough research on that, I would say.
Okay.
First of all, blockchain interoperability, generally it's a hard problem. Mm-hmm. You actually cannot have true interoperability without a trusted third party. And let me talk a bit about this. So if you want to validate what happens in another blockchain, so imagine that you have your blockchain A, blockchain Aviva, and you have another blockchain B, that has transactions happening that you want to validate, right? So the only way for you to validate in a completely trustless way, 100% things formally done, you would have to include a subset of that blockchain B in your blockchain A in order you to be able to validate the blocks and thus the transactions that compose those blocks. This is obviously very costly, very computationally expensive as well, because you would probably need to include a lot of information on your blockchain A. This is not desirable. And furthermore, it may not be possible due to computational limitations from blockchain A to verify what is happening in blockchain B. So for example, if you take Bitcoin and you're trying to validate Ethereum transactions, that may not just be possible because in Ethereum you have smart contracts, you can execute them, and they generate transactions, whereas in Bitcoin you have a much simpler model. So that's one of the key points. Blockchain interoperability, it's not generally possible without a trusted third party. But I should also stress that this trusted third party may be a blockchain in itself or maybe a smart contract, right? So one of the most common interoperability mechanisms that there are hash lock time contracts, which is one of the subcategories of the cryptocurrency directed approaches. And basically here, your trust anchor, your way of trusting that the interoperability mechanism is trustable, are smart contracts, right? So in this mechanism, you deploy a smart contract with a hash lock, which is essentially, it's locked with a secret. Imagine you have a sequence, you make a hash, a digest, and you put that digest on the smart contract. The other person can only unlock that smart contract if he or she has the secret. This allows to have atomic cross-chain swaps, so trade, for example, Bitcoin for Ether. We can trust this process because the smart contract actually enforces that the trade happens. We cannot take the assets and run away.
Right.
If we make everything very clear, if we use smart contracts, if they are public, transparent, then it's more difficult to mess with interoperability, right? But if we have, imagine, very critical processes and we have a centralized client making that bridge between blockchains, things can go wrong. But they go wrong if there is not enough care, if there is not enough scrutiny in how this centralized party handles the cross-blockchain transactions.
So going back to that first of the three categories that we talked about that's in your paper, which is the cryptocurrency directed interoperability approaches. Have you actually spoken to any two crypto-based blockchains and asked them how they would feel about entertaining the idea of being interoperable?
So you're asking if people running those blockchains are willing to interoperate?
It would be interesting to see if you've had any conversations with actual cryptocurrencies. Anyone on CoinMarketCap, let's say, and have you tried like to be the Tinder of cryptocurrency and try to see if you can get two of these cryptocurrencies to come together and build some kind of interoperable system?
I have not done that, but I can tell you that fortunately it's not needed. Because as these blockchains are public, people can just show up and build interoperability solutions without their permission, let's say. Imagine if we're talking about the people who are, for instance, responsible for the evolution of the Bitcoin protocol or the Ethereum Foundation. They are not in charge of these solutions. So, for example, we have one sidechain called the Bitcoin Relay, which is a smart contract running on Ethereum that validates, that aggregates information of what happens at the Bitcoin blockchain. This is actually very simple. There are nodes, can be anyone actually, and they submit the headers of blocks, of Bitcoin blocks into the smart contract, which is the Bitcoin Relay. And essentially the contract validates them, right, can reward them, and the results, the outputs can be used by Ethereum nodes. So this can be useful to know if a transaction has happened in the Bitcoin blockchain. It could enable behaviors such as if in the Bitcoin blockchain someone sends X Ether to this address, then in the Ethereum network I will do this, and you can write a smart contract for doing this. And that's one of the ways of people to have independence regarding these solutions in public blockchains. If we're talking about private blockchains, the conversation is totally different. But there are also some initiatives for people to create cryptocurrencies that can navigate across blockchains. One of those projects is called the TAST, Token Atomic Swaps Technology. So it's one of the projects that wants to create multi-blockchain token system. So basically a token that can be sent from one blockchain to another. This is actually difficult to do, but there are some projects that are trying to provide this kind of flexibility for the end users. And this is in the complete interest of, for example, exchanges, right? They want to promote more flexibility so people can transact more and generate more income to them as well.
You just touched on atomic swaps. Would you like to give an explanation to our listeners about what an atomic swap is?
An atomic swap can be considered a subset of the hash time lock contract technologies. They enable cross-chain exchanges, right? So they allow a user to send a certain amount of cryptocurrency to another user in exchange for another cryptocurrency held in another blockchain, right? And this typically happens when you have tokens that are based on the same blockchain system. So based on Ethereum, on the Ethereum virtual machine blockchain. They both support smart contracts. So it's essentially all in all, it's I have this token, you have another token, we have a smart contract in the middle that mediates our change, and then we trade it. Either both of us gets the other token or none of us gets the token. That's the idea behind an atomic swap.
I mean, atomic swaps for all purposes. Wouldn't that be blockchain interoperability, especially for cryptocurrencies? Wouldn't that be like one of the subheadings under that category?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
They are the result of a set of techniques. In this case, HTML contracts. They are enabled by that, right? Atomic swaps are just it's the process, right? The process of exchanging tokens. But atomic swaps could also be realized with other types of solutions. We could have a centralized system, a centralized client performing atomic swaps.
Okay, so besides atomic swaps, what else can be built that would be as interesting as an atomic swap? You talked about TAST, which is this token atomic swap technology. Maybe I'm not reading into this correctly, but it sounds like it's really just atomic swaps. But what else is there in terms of what other things are being built out there that the community can look at your paper and go, okay, we definitely need to look into this blockchain interoperability. We can get over the fact that blockchains need to be, as we said before, this independent peer-to-peer system, which it should be for a blockchain. So once they get over that, what else do you think people should be looking at to create an interoperable system?
Right, that's an excellent question, and this is actually what the other two categories try to answer to. So the most of the use cases in terms of an absolute number are encoded in the other two categories, the blockchain engines and the blockchain connectors. They provide the most flexibility. The first category, the crypto-related solutions, only provide or are directed to only provide a token that can be transferred across blockchains, atomic swaps, and not much more, actually. That's the primary focus of these types of solutions. And they actually work, right? With some limitations, they're being improved, but they work. It's more or less a solved problem, let's say. On the other hand, we have tons of use cases that haven't been explored because they're typically explored in private blockchains. So for example, Hyperledger Fabric, it's an enterprise-grade blockchain that provides support for use cases such as supply chain, right? You produce a good and that good is going to be changing his owner until the final consumer, and it might be desirable that we have not only the full provenance of that asset, but also we have a way for that transfer to happen without any problems in an automatic way, right? Because typically in supply chains nowadays, organizations still rely a lot on paper trails, right? And that's a manual process and it's definitely not efficient. That's also one of the reasons why in the first outbreak of COVID, we were having such a shortage of some of the materials because people were getting infected. They were going to the workplace. They couldn't sign those paper trails and the supply chain essentially stopped. But if we encode that business logic in a blockchain with smart contracts, we can automate all that process. So these types of solutions that are more suitable to private blockchains, now with blockchain interoperability, people can actually ally the private blockchains with public blockchains. So I could have some processing happening in a private blockchain, and I could periodically put out a proof in a public blockchain such as Ethereum, and at the same time provide support for enterprise clients that need privacy and provide support for the general community that can benefit from a more general solution. It's one of the examples of a use case that could benefit from a multiple blockchain approach.
That is really interesting. Now, you see, just talking about a multiple blockchain approach, I just want to ask you this other question. So interoperability in its own right suggests that you have two different blockchains who are obviously working well together, and there are bridges across to each one of them. Well, what about if the two blockchains were actually woven together to actually meld them into one as such? Instead of the holding hands theory, a co-joined theory. some of these players, obviously, it would be very interesting to see how that could happen, because obviously their blockchains are written very differently. They're worlds apart, the algorithms. But in some cases, you can actually see where weaving two blockchains together would go one step beyond interoperability. It wouldn't even be interoperability at that point. It would be code-joined operability. I mean, have you actually looked into also comparing the interoperability with this combination theory where you are building a blockchain which basically contains both the ledgers? But you see, what that does is obviously it reduces the theory behind, I guess, this paper, because you're not talking really about interoperability anymore. You're talking about a bringing together of the DNA as such. So did you think about that kind of aspect?
I think that's a very interesting idea. I think we can reduce this idea to the concept of blockchain migrators. If we look at it in a data-centric perspective, joining two blockchains, merging two blockchains, I'm not considering the functional aspect, right? If we're looking in a data perspective, that is actually a very interesting idea, and that could happen for a multitude of use cases. For example, audits or data analysis, or even backups of parts of both ledgers. That could happen. And this can actually correspond to one of the categories, which are the blockchain migrators, which is something very new, very recent, and I'm actually working on trying to build a blockchain migrator that can migrate from Ethereum to Fabric. So we have a decentralized application running in Fabric, which has limited decentralization, and the tool, the blockchain migrator, should be able to migrate the data that it's in Fabric to Ethereum and span this centralized app in Ethereum. This idea of migration, so the idea is that the blockchain is essentially a set of transactions. Those transactions can be visualized as contributing to a state, right? So if we consider a state a key value mapping, so essentially the key is a unique identifier and the value, it's the content of the state, then we could put every transaction in a state, right? So for example, in Ethereum, we could consider that the key of a state is the Ethereum address, the address of an account, whereas the value would be everything else, the other information, the balance, the smart contracts it deployed, etc., etc. Given this, we could reduce the blockchain to a set of states, right? And we can just take those states and put them in a standardized data format, right? And this is what I call a blockchain view, which is the set of states that a stakeholder can see on a blockchain. And then you could take those states and input them in another blockchain, right? And this way you have a mapping between the source blockchain and the target blockchain, and this would be called the blockchain migration, right? Now, you were talking about merging blockchains.
Yes.
If I got it right.
Yeah, yes.
Then this would be the problem of migrating two blockchains to a third source, to a third target blockchain, right? It would be, you would have an extra difficulty, which would be to merge the data from both blockchains. But you can do that with something that it's called view integration techniques. So that's actually, in theory, possible, but people haven't been doing it for blockchains. This is quite new.
I understand, especially when we're talking about interoperability is needed. Of course it is, because it would be, otherwise we're not gonna grow this future with blockchain if it's so fragmented. It's an obvious, I don't want to sit here and really insult anybody's intelligence, because I know that all of our listeners understand that if blockchains don't have this interoperability function, that it's going to create a massive amount of silos out there. And especially if you're talking about something such as supply chain, you can't have that. And you can't have it. It's not even just in supply chain. You're talking about like healthcare, aviation, trade, finance, anything. You can't have a ton of silos out there where then people can't operate. Their systems won't be interoperational. Now, and it's also, I will just say that with interoperability, you're obviously, it's the data sharing that you're getting. It's obviously easier for the execution of things like smart contracts. It's obviously a humongous partnership activity and allows for solutions to be acted upon probably quicker than blockchain on its own. Any one blockchain on its own can obviously solve things. But I'm just wondering if the biggest beneficiary of, especially when we're talking about crypto, it's going to be the exchanges. But, in terms of exchanges getting their hands on systems which are interoperable, again, I'm just trying to see if this is something where the exchanges themselves need to maybe push this. I think the exchanges could push this and be the people who lead on this. The exchanges who are the biggest, I would say, I don't want to say innovators because they're not, but they're the ones who push a lot of, interoperability between cryptocurrencies is obviously something that would need to be pushed by the people who are really proponents of cryptocurrency in the first place. And that is the exchanges. Do you agree with that?
I would say that the main beneficiaries would be businesses based in blockchain applications.
Really? Okay.
Although the exchanges would absolutely benefit from that. So they could actually, there is a solution category, which is the blockchain connectors. And inside this category, you have subcategories. One of them is the blockchain agnostic protocols. Essentially, they define this subcategory defines solutions that propose a blockchain agnostic protocol for interoperability. One of them is the interledger protocol. This protocol defines a data format and a set of messages for transferring data packets that are actually a representation of money. So the interledger protocol, it's a peer-to-peer payment network. It firstly was directed to cryptocurrency transfers, but after that it was generalized not only for crypto but also for fiat. So essentially it defines a lowest unit common denominator across distributed ledgers, and this common denominator is the interledger protocol packet, right? And the protocol allows to send multiple of these packets through a network of connectors, and these packets represent money. And that would be the way in which you can literally send, well, not literally, but a representation of euros, a representation of Bitcoin. And these would allow in theory to connect, for example, Visa to the Bitcoin network, Visa to exchanges, and the exchanges could connect to other blockchains with this protocol as well. So it would allow these notary schemes, these exchanges, to have more networks in which they could provide their users to interact with. So it would raise the services that they could provide to their end users. And this would obviously be a big win for them, and a big win for the users that now have more flexibility for exchanging their investments. But of course, that businesses that rely on blockchain would also have big advantages, because now we can fully explore the capabilities of private blockchains, because private blockchains are typically serving niche cases. But if we can connect them to other private blockchains, to other public blockchains, then we can have a network that is both private and decentralized, more or less decentralized. Private blockchains are still decentralized if they're done correctly, although they're less than public blockchains, obviously.
Do you think those people who could actually make interoperability happen quicker, do you honestly feel that those are the business sectors that are out there in the world, and not so much the exchanges and the finance, everything to do with crypto? Do you think it's more business-led or money-led, the people who will actually make this run quicker to go forward with interoperability?
There are several layers of interoperability: semantic interoperability, organizational, technical. Technical interoperability is an interesting problem on its own right? So the academics tackle this problem as a necessary problem, as a step forward to evolving the technology. Because if we have interoperability, if we solve interoperability, we can also help solving scalability. We can also help solving privacy. We can also help providing a subset of functionalities to a subset of users. So it generally enhances the potential of the technology. Now, given this, it also enables new use cases. And given that it enables use cases, the first people getting there are the people that are the most well positioned in terms of business positioning, right? So for example, Polkadot was initiated a few years ago, 2016, and they were already thinking about interoperability since the very beginning. They look at Ethereum and said, okay, this cannot interoperate in a very easy way. Actually, Ethereum version 2 will have, it's predicted to have interoperability capabilities, at least enhanced ones. And they were looking at the interoperability since the very beginning. So they were positioning, they would know that in a few years, half a decade or even a decade, interoperability would be needed. And if they were there first, they would be very well positioned to answer to that need. And it's actually a need that it's arising right now. At Hyperledger Cactus, we received an email on our mailing list of a proposal of a use case. People were asking us if they could use Cactus to interoperate a Fabric instance with a private Ethereum network instance. So it was for a climate change solution, CO2 tracker, I believe.
Right.
So you would perform your operations on a private blockchain, a Fabric blockchain. Essentially, you would have, I assume you would have the government involved, probably some recycling companies, CO2 emitters, and based on your emissions of CO2, you would be rewarded tokens, and those tokens could also be sent to the Ethereum network that was connected to the Fabric network, and they needed Cactus for that. So all in all, I think people who start thinking, and in particular blockchain businesses who start to think about interoperability beforehand, will be better positioned, and of course the exchanges as well. I believe they have good incentives to move interoperability forward, because if blockchain succeeds, then the exchanges will succeed always.
I absolutely agree. I think, you see, because I think money rules the roost. And I think in terms of a lot of companies who are talking about blockchain, which I think is absolutely phenomenal, I'm not sure that most companies in the world are at a place yet in this very small timeline of blockchain and crypto. I'm not sure that enough companies are really understanding, first of all, what technology they're already using in their own companies, but how to even integrate something called blockchain, which will improve, enhance, whatever words you want to use. But blockchain, to most people, when I go and I talk to any companies, they look at me sideways and they have no clue what we're talking about. Yes, even in supply chain. Yeah, there's a lot of companies obviously right now creating, especially because of COVID, which you mentioned. There are a lot of companies who are in supply chain who are using it, but those are mainly the bigger ones. And then they're working with some really heavy brands like IBM's Watson and God knows what. I mean, these are like we're talking the Maersks of this world, yeah, or some other massive, these giants in the industries of supply chain. But when you're talking about the 99% of the other guys in the world who probably added up will make Maersk look like, a tadpole, you talk to these other players and they don't even understand what blockchain is about and why it's out there. So being interoperable about something that they clearly don't even have a clue about, it is obviously going to be something where if it's built into the blockchains now, when these smaller companies do come to integrating it, it's going to be an easier sell, because then it's not, again, going back to the silo theory where people are like, oh, this sounds really great. Yeah, we want to use it. Oh, but you can't really use it because it doesn't actually work with this, or this. But, but I guess we talked before already in terms of cryptocurrency, yeah, where if we just look at the pool of users, which is steadily growing out there, and we look at people who are using a crypto to pay for things and actually do the stuff that Satoshi wrote about in his famous white paper, to actually use it as as an actual currency. And, one of the first things I can see interoperability working with is with currency, especially as more and more countries are coming out with their own CBDCs, which is the central bank digital currencies, and they're doing this on a serious level. As I covered in a last podcast, or I don't remember when it was, but one of my past podcasts where we talked about what's happening in the Bahamas, in Thailand, in China, and you name it, the list is getting longer, where many of these countries are implementing them. And then you have the talk shops, such as the EU and the United States. Australia said they're not interested right now in a CBDC of any kind. But it's the implementers who normally get things rolling and really quickly. And that's why I'm thinking interoperability in terms of what's happening in that world of cryptocurrency-based interoperability approach. That's what's going to be, I think that's what's going to push. If this is going to be pushed forward in any way, shape, or form, it's going to start with the actual blockchain as a backbone of crypto kind of thing. That's what I personally think. And, we talked about atomic swaps, so that's already happening, and that's a form of interoperability, although I don't know if it would be a pure classification. And I'm sure that there's even APIs, but that, of course, is dangerous as hell. We all know APIs can lead to. So it's quite interesting because you're right. The paper is totally correct. Your paper is spot on in where something is needed. And there are many companies. You mentioned Polkadot. There's many companies out there who are looking at these solutions. You have Chainlink, you have Cosmos, you have Hybrix. And again, and I think I talked about WanChain also a couple of years ago, maybe on a podcast. So it's one of the early ones. Facilitating communication between any blockchains is obviously to the benefit of the users who are involved in those blockchains. But just how successful do you think it's going to be in terms of rolling this out, given that every day more and more blockchains are being developed, created, written, whatever way you want to look at this?
It's normal to see why enterprises kind of suspicious to blockchain, because the first thing that many people think when they hear about blockchain are cryptocurrencies. And we all know that cryptocurrencies have a lot of risk involved, especially in investing, which leads to people trying to take advantage of others, leading to scams and to the bad reputation of blockchain.
Absolutely.
That is changing, I think, when people and when companies decide to look more carefully about what this is, how they can incorporate this in their processes, then things will change. But this is, I think it has been slowed down by that reputation that precedes blockchain, unfortunately. And companies are not investing in blockchain because first, they don't know what it is. And second, there is too much risk, as I've mentioned before. It's very expensive to develop a blockchain solution. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of resources. So people are not very eager to explore the benefits. And this is important. This is actually a very dangerous, a very strong blockade, because companies don't want to use blockchain for the sake of using blockchain unless they want to be popular, which is probably a bad approach. To use blockchain with their centralized services. They want to integrate them so they can take value out of the technology. But for that, they need standards, right? They need standards. They need a standardized way of doing that so they can even talk to other blockchains. And they need some experience, which is what is lacking at the moment. So, for example, the IATF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, is developing a protocol called the Open Digital Asset Protocol, which defines a software system, a software component called the gateway. And this gateway is meant to be a point of contact with a certain blockchain. So gateways can talk to gateways and perform asset transfers. And there is actually work around this to create a standard, right? So if we have a standard from IATF or any other standards organization, then companies can start implementing gateways, and those gateways can talk with several blockchains. They can talk with their centralized services. They can use standardized APIs. Of course, this has the risk of sending garbage or sending not accurate information to the blockchains, but it's up to the companies to manage that, of course. But at least there's a standardized way of doing things. This would enable companies to trust more on the technology as it is maturing, actually, and move things forward, right? And also the rise of blockchain as a service capabilities or services that are delivered by, for example, Amazon or IBM, Microsoft, I believe too. It may facilitate the adoption of blockchain technology, although it's a bit, I probably would say that it goes a bit against the idea of blockchain, which is decentralization. If you have all your blockchain infrastructure running on a cloud, you would have to take precautions to guarantee that everything is operating correctly. There are some methods that explore that, but it's still ongoing research. At this moment, I think it's probably a bit centralized solution to start with. But that's probably where companies would start, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's much easier and it's much straightforward. It's much more straightforward, and they have more support that they cannot have now.
Your paper definitely highlights the fact that, a seamless exchange of data, this is what is going to be crucial to the success of blockchain in the business world. Mm-hmm. That is all businesses run on, is data. They don't care about anything else. Cryptocurrency users care about the value of their crypto, and they want to know that they can, buy, sell, swap, whatever the word is, that means get some money on their blockchain. So the needs are, of course, numbers are data, but we all know what I'm trying to say when I'm saying that the needs for interoperability are different given mm-hmm. if it's for a business or given that it's for an individual user, who's looking for, a way to use this as a method of payment or transaction or investment, whatever you want to say. So, are you then, you have this great paper. Obviously, we know that people are reading it. Even, the fact that you're here, I've read it. It's brilliant. What is it that's going to happen then to make this go to the next step? What have you had anyone contact you and say, we're looking at doing something in terms of interoperability? We want to make a token that can be used across the bridges and allow transactions to be conducted on, this chain or multi-chain or whatever it is. Have you had anyone contact you so that they could get more information on how to look at the world in a more open view?
Yes, definitely. I've had many contacts, enterprise like that express their interest in having infrastructure that allow them to interoperate. So the need is to interoperate, but there are no tools currently that satisfy enterprise needs. I'm mostly talking about enterprise needs because Cactus, it's more or less directed to enterprises, although end users, so individuals, can also use Cactus to manage their presence in different blockchains. So Cactus would have a key storage mechanism, right? Although the current ones are rather simple, and users could encode, right? They could program Cactus to, for example, perform automatic buys on a target blockchain with their credentials and automate their presence, their flows, their own personal business on several blockchains. So I think the development of infrastructure aligned with standards would be of the biggest importance to move the technology forward, along with improvements on scalability and privacy. But those needs are here since the inception of blockchain. They are still very important problems. And of course, we need to make sure that these infrastructures are safe, that the interoperability mechanisms are safe, as in they're secure, right? So I need to be sure that when I'm using Cactus or any other interoperability solutions, my information will not be leaked, or that my transaction will be correctly transformed. Let's say my code that encodes my business logic will be correctly transformed into the transactions to be issued at the target blockchains. So standardization is a way forward, right? And if companies are adopting blockchain, which and governments as well, organizations that are part of the government, then I think that more interest in the technology as a whole will rise. So it will become more mainstream. More people will have access to to cryptocurrencies and all the benefits that it gives. And I think that would move things forward. Possibly the interest of governments in a digital currency would be a big potentiator of blockchain.
Oh, absolutely. There have been some companies who have come together with their blockchain systems and have really started down this road of, I know I said before, the Tinder of blockchain, but they've somehow found each other to try to create some kind of marriage. And, so you have apparently Kava Labs and IrisNet. Apparently Kava Labs teamed up with IrisNet to provide this technology foundation, which would facilitate the development of their distributed business applications. And so they are looking to, well, they have been developing solutions to make them interoperable by using Cosmos to come together. And there's a number, there's a number of other relationships that have been formed, which they are going down this road. But, again, I think it's still slow and steady the way that this is all being approached. But you still have people who will be operating in these silos because you're talking about, really what you're talking about here, maybe in many instances, is that the companies themselves, if we're talking about companies now, which, by the way, means it'll take forever because companies are still bureaucratic on every level. So you have to have very innovative people in companies to not only implement blockchain within their company, but then look for another company who's also that innovative, and then look to see how you can marry your two blockchain ledgers. And for another instance, Quant Overledger and Oracle Cloud. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely incredible, but but that's interesting because I think they used an API, and I'm very skeptical of APIs. I think APIs are the worst idea in the world, and maybe I shouldn't say that because Quant Overledger or Oracle Cloud might be listening. But yes, I'm not a very big fan of APIs.
Using APIs, it's perhaps it's the best way of having a performant, centralized system where companies can manage their business and interact with blockchains. But of course that it typically doesn't offer many guarantees with regards to that it's not transparent, it's not decentralized. That's perhaps why you are not very fond of it. Of course that if everything is public and transparent, then you have traceability, thus you have accountability, and generally it's a good way of doing things. This also relates to the corporate innovation that we were talking a bit ago. Actually, in my master's, I worked with the Portuguese government, and they actually were interested in developing a proof of concept for an application, which I later called Justice Chain, perhaps for a lack of a better name.
Right.
And the general idea was to protect so you have these information systems that judges use, but it's managed by the government, right? And that is, the judges typically don't own anything, let's say, to the governments. There are different types of powers, the judicial power and the executive power. So the judges were not trusting the government in a way that they have no guarantees of what is the government doing with their data, with the processes, with who accesses the system and so on. So the solution there was actually using blockchain. So the idea was that the system generates a log of operations, and this log has every action that a judge does, for instance, and you could only access the logs, right, with the permission of the involved parties, right? So the government people could only access the logs if the judges let them, and the judges could only access the logs if the government people let them. Of course, that this relies on putting information on the blockchain, right? But at least you have the guarantee that that information won't be changed. If that information is in a centralized database, it can be changed and you can delete your traces. So at least now that wouldn't happen. And this causes an indirect benefit for not only for the judges and the government, but also for the citizens. As in, it is now more difficult for corruption to happen. And this is also one of the reasons that they might be interested in interoperability. It's of their best interest to keep this system and also provide proofs from time to time that the logs, for example, haven't been tampered with, proofs of who accesses the logs and when, right? And these proofs can be fed to the general public, right? And who talks about these justice systems can talk about how public funds are managed, how taxes are collected, right? How political campaigns are done. So imagine politicians promising things to people and then not fulfilling them. So actually, these private blockchains can deliver value not only for the main stakeholders, but also for the rest of the people. But since they are isolated silos, it's still difficult for people to perceive them, and organizations too. But I think this was a special case because typically it's difficult to work with governments in this type of projects. It's very new for them.
Governments fall into the same category as businesses. The adoption rate, it's still at a 0 on any kind of Cartesian plane. It's very, very slow on the uptake when in terms of businesses adopting a blockchain approach. So just one other thing I wanted to point out on page, I think 44 of your paper, I just want to point out one paragraph that you wrote where you said, and it's a quote from the last paragraph on the page where it says, blockchain specific APIs are unlikely to generalize well across radically different technical implementations.
Yes.
So I think you like APIs as much as I do. So I just wanted to just quote you, sir.
Well, this is because it's a lot of work, right? If you have a system that does interoperability with several blockchains like Cactus, it's a tremendous amount of work to make this particular system to talk with all other blockchains.
Oh, of course,
right?
Of course.
And it doesn't scale. You have to implement a connector and a validator. So validators actually fetch the status of the blockchain so you can perform operations based on what happened. And the connectors are active components. They have behavior. So they issue transactions, they deploy smart contracts, etc. So you have to deploy a pair of these for each blockchain. If you have, let's say, a few dozens, 100 blockchains, you can imagine it's not scalable at all. In the other hand, it offers you a bit flexibility in the way that you can program your business logic, but it's not very scalable. In the other hand, you have, for example, the Interledger protocol, which is way more generalizable, but it has a major drawback, which is it requires the underlying blockchains to change their communication, their protocol. So actually, the change would be the responsibility of the underlying blockchains. So blockchains would have to agree, okay, we'll use this standard and we'll communicate with this protocol, and that's not likely to happen. I would say it's impossible. Blockchains are supposed to be autonomous. So they're changing, but only up to a certain point, up to only a certain degree.
I think you're going to have to come out with a few more papers.
Let's see.
You've got a lot of stuff to look into here in terms of interoperability solutions, and because, there's a lot here which is going to have to change, especially fundamentals. And as we go on in this world, and I think a lot has changed in the last year, much more than ever in terms of blockchain technology and its implementation. More people have looked into it, but not millions more companies have looked into it. I'd say thousands of companies have seriously looked into it and gone down the roads of implementation. But it's going to be an important step in persuading any company or network that they need to have interoperating blockchains, or a blockchain in the first instance, so that they can have that exchange of data. Yeah, you've got a great paper, but a long road to travel on this one.
Yeah, my advisors tell me the same, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, but look, you've got me, and I'm a total advocate, and I just want to thank you so much, Rafael, for doing this brilliant piece of work. I'm looking forward to part 2. If there is a part 2.
My pleasure, Aviva.
No, thanks. Really. Yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on. And I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning. Actually, let me do a proper thank you. Thank you, Rafael, for coming on to Crypto and Blockchain Talk.
You're welcome, Aviva, and thank you for you, all the listeners for listening to us. on this conversation about interoperability.
Well, I got to tell you, our listeners will be thrilled. I would like to thank all of our listeners and ask you to tell your friends and family to please download us on their podcasting platform of choice. There are many podcasting platforms to choose from when you're listening to Crypto and Blockchain Talk, and those are all listed on cryptoandblockchaintalk.com. And the list is quite thorough with Acast, iTunes, Podbeam, Spotify, SoundCloud, Amazon Music, and many, many more. Also, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that these podcasts are also streamed on our sister radio station, crypto24radio.com. That's crypto24radio.com, where we play not only breaking news and podcasts, but also some pretty funky music, so have a tune in. We also have our usual conduits on social media where you can feel free to leave us any comments. We like the nice ones, please. And if there's any suggestions or anything else you'd like to contact us about, please email us. We love email and love hearing from you directly. And that email address is education@savvydigital. That's education@savvy, SAVII digital.com. Again, thank you for tuning in and listening. We know you have a myriad of choices and loads of podcasts that you can listen to. So when you listen to us, we don't take that decision lightly. Thank you. So on that note, please take care, be safe, and goodbye.